Hi YouTube and Blade Forums, John here again. Today I'm here to do a video on locking folding knives. And this video is different from typical ones. I'm not going to go over which lock is the strongest. What I want to go over is which lock is the safest. So this is going to be more of a review or a rundown for people who are new into folding knives and don't have much experience with them. Because most of us seasoned users are going to know about these and what they mean. But for your average knife user who does everyday carry, a locking knife is really not truly an essential feature to have. I have personally owned, for the first 5 years I owned a knife. From the age of 12 to 17 I owned a Victorinox Swiss Army knife, and those don't lock. They can close on you, okay? But I've never had one closed on me. So with folding knives that don't have a lock, and even ones that have a lock, as long as you're using the knife properly, you're not abusing it, and you're not being careless with what you're cutting, you're going to be fine, okay? The only time that you might run into a risk using the blade properly is doing some hard cutting tasks where the blade is actually in the medium, where it's kind of in there, and if you accidentally push towards the wrong side of the blade, it could close on you, okay? But that's not too common of an occurrence, okay? So the way I view a lock on a knife is just simply an added measure of safety. Okay. Now, my favorite lock types are the axis type locks. Okay. Then followed by the frame locks. And I just want to go and show you a few reasons why I prefer these type locks followed by these types. All right. So, first and foremost, on your typical, kind of commonplace knives with the back lock or the liner locks or the frame locks, when you're using the blade, in order to close and disengage the lock, your fingers or your thumb have to be put into the path of the closing blade at some point, okay? Whether you close this locking back knife with two hands or whether you close it with one hand, your finger or thumb is going to go in the way of that closing blade, all right? And that's not much of an issue for people who are used to knives, but if you're clumsy, if you're not very well coordinated or don't have very good eye-hand coordination, or you're drowsy or tired or under the influence, there's going to be a much greater likelihood of you actually nicking the back of your finger or thumb while trying to close one of these things, okay? So that's a lock back. Also, one of the other slight downsides on a lock back, it's not very common, it's highly unlikely to happen, but when you're doing some strong cuts, you could potentially disengage the lock back. When you're pushing down, it is possible that your palm or somewhere on the back of your hand disengages that lock back. But what Spyderco does is they actually kind of scallop out the lock bar here. So you can see it actually kind of contours down, and that makes that a less likely occurrence to happen. So that's not something I would be afraid of on here. It's just something that could happen, okay? And so when you're bearing down on there, your palm is pressing down on the locking mechanism, okay? On your typical frame lock here, I like this knife because when you're bearing down, there's no locking mechanism that you're pressing down on. So that's a good thing, okay? However, on this one you have to place your thumb in the way of the closing blade. And if you see, that takes some practice and some coordination to remove your thumb out of the way to not nick it, alright? But you can do it two-handed as well. It's a little safer, but still your thumb is in the way of the closing blade, okay? So, it's a safety issue. But once you get used to it, you're okay. But even the most seasoned knife user with a frame lock or a liner lock is still bound to nick themselves at some point. It can always happen, especially when you're tired or drowsy or under the influence. And of course you should never use a knife or any weapon or anything dangerous under the influence. Okay. Now, another thing about the frame lock that I see as a downside is when you're doing some really hard cuts, your fingers are going to tend to push on the lock bar here. It's going to push it more into the knife. And to me, that's something that causes wear. And if the knife is older or not as well built, the actual lock can push all the way to the back side of the knife, and that can make it a dangerous situation to use. The knife is not as stable once it's all the way over sometimes, okay? So that is one of the downsides of the frame lock in my opinion, okay? That one's a pretty strong one. It has a metal insert. But this one here, this one has, and by the way, that's a hardened metal insert. This one is a stainless steel knife frame lock, but it's not as heavy duty as the ZT. So this one is more likely to push in all the way when you're using it hard, okay? On this one though, the clip does happen to give you some protection on using it, okay? But that's always a possibility. Now, on the access type locks, these are my favorites, okay? Because this is the only locking knife that I've ever owned is this kind of style, where your fingers or thumb does not have to be in the way of the closing blade. So if you notice, when I open it, if I close it two-handed, you see how all my appendages are clear of the blade. No risk of cutting myself when closing the blade, okay? Also, if I do it one-handed, all I have to do is disengage the lock by pulling it back and flick it closed, okay? And you can do it harder and close it all the way in. So that's a very safe mechanism, okay? Your fingers are not in the way of the closing knife. Furthermore, when you're using the knife, there is nothing to disengage the lock on the back, and when you're squeezing really hard, there's no lock bar here to push in towards the other side, okay? So the access lock, it's very difficult to disengage during use. I mean, you'd actually have to squeeze on the access lock and somehow pull back on the bar while you're using it. And that's something that would be almost impossible to do when you're using the knife properly, okay? So this I rate as one of the most unlikely knives to close on you inadvertently. It's an excellent lock. Same goes for the Blackie Collins bolt action lock on the Spyderco Sage 3. It operates in the same way as the access lock, except this one just has a bolt that goes back and forth instead of a bar that slides back and forth. Okay, but same principle of operation. You can close it one-handed or two-handed, and your thumb or fingers do not have to be in the way of the closing blade. Okay, so excellent if you're not a very coordinated person or a clumsy person. All right, now to reliability. Okay, liner locks, they have a very thin spring in here. This little bar here that engages the tang of the knife that holds it open. This is very thin. So, you know, it can get a little looser over time. The metal wears out. You can only actuate it so many times before it becomes a little loose and before the knife starts to go all the way to the very end of the knife, okay? So, and the same goes on the frame locks, okay? You can only use it so many times before this metal becomes fatigued and starts to move over too easily, or it doesn't have enough tension to go far over, or where it engages with the back of the tang, where it can actually up here, where it can actually wear its way all the way through to the other side of the tang here, okay? So you see how this engages? When it wears down, it can go clear to the other side. That's going to take a long time, but it can happen, okay? So this brings me to one of the disadvantages in reliability. Okay, oftentimes a lot of people say, okay, the access lock is not reliable, it's not going to last a long time, and that is true in a way because it does have these two springs in here called omega springs. They're very delicate. They should last you for 5 to 10 years if you or more if you use your knife regularly, but you don't just flick it for fun while watching TV, okay? But the thing about an access lock is it does have two omega springs. So if one breaks, your access lock will still function. It'll still hold the knife open safely, okay? What it won't do though is hold the knife closed safely. When you have one access lock spring broken, the knife can come open easier in your pocket, okay? So, when it comes to the omega springs breaking, the thing about this, if this lock breaks on you, you can set it into benchmate and it can be replaced, okay? The knife can be salvaged, it can be repaired, and back to perfect working condition because this lock in no way causes any damage to the actual structure of the knife. Now compare this with your frame lock, okay? Because your lock is integral with the frame and it is part of the frame, if this lock breaks, the knife is ruined. This lock cannot be salvaged, it cannot be repaired, okay? So once this locking mechanism here, the handle, the frame lock breaks, the knife is done, okay? The only way this knife will be repaired is if the manufacturer is willing to give you a new half of the handle here, okay? But in that case, there's nothing to replace. Now, as the hardened steel insert breaks down, that they'll replace. That's a part you can buy and you can put it in yourself even, okay? That's replaceable. But, like I said, if this locking mechanism breaks, the knife is done, okay? And you're just at the grace of the knife company if they're willing to give you a new one or not, okay? But that wouldn't be wear and tear. I mean, that wouldn't be a defect. That would just be wear and tear. It would be the knife running its course. And as I said before, that's a good thing about a Benchmade lock or any lock like it, is because the lock is not integral to the handle or to any non-replaceable part of the knife. It is repairable, okay? Completely repairable. However, I believe that the frame lock is likely to last longer before needing service than is the access lock, okay? I have had an access lock break on me within 2 years, okay? So it can happen, but it's not the norm, okay? So, for overall longevity, assuming that Benchmade stays in business always and you can always send it into them, or aftermarket parts are made for it, this knife can last forever with service, okay? Now, even if Benchmade goes out of business, as long as Omega springs are available to buy for this, if you can get them aftermarket, this knife can last forever, okay? With this one, if this handle lock breaks here, it's done, okay? It's over, all right? Unless the company makes the entire handle here with the frame lock, all right? So, now with the back lock, this is also a serviceable knife. If your back lock wears out, it's just a simple thing. This lock bar can be replaced here. They can put a new piece in there, okay? So that's basically my rundown. Also, with the access lock, whatever I said on the access lock holds true for the bolt lock and also for the cage ball bearing lock on the Spyderco Mannix knife as well. So that's my opinion on the locking knives, okay? As far as strongest one goes, I don't really care because they've all held for me and I've never had a problem, and I don't think you'll have a problem either, okay? So with that said, like I said, my favorite knife lock is the access lock, probably followed by the frame lock. Like I said, the reason I like these locks better is because you can squeeze the knife, you can bear down on the knife, and this lock is not going to disengage, okay? Whereas on this one, if you squeeze hard on it, it can push the lock bar all the way clear to the other side. On a lock back, if you push hard on it, you could actually pop this up and disengage the knife, okay? Those are very, very rare circumstances, and don't let that prevent you from buying a knife, okay? Because that's just unlikely to happen to you, but it could, all right? So, that's my review. Let me know what you guys think. It's just my review after